I'll tell you what I would do. I'd never apologize to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's trying to destroy our province, destroy our country, steal manufacturing jobs and auto sector jobs, steel jobs, aluminum jobs. The list keeps going on. I'll never apologize to President Trump.
In a week already charged with tariff tension and political theater, Ontario Premier Doug Ford delivered a statement that cut straight through the noise. "I'll never apologize to Donald Trump," he told reporters. "They could put me on a stretching rack. I wouldn't do it." Those words landed like a thunderclap. Ford wasn't just rejecting Trump's demand for contrition over Ontario's controversial anti-tariff ad. He was drawing a line in the sand for all of Canada. His tone was defiant, his message unmistakable. Canada would not bow, not even under direct pressure from the White House.
The drama began with an unexpected media offensive. Ontario's government had purchased airtime across American networks for a provocative commercial that used archival audio of Ronald Reagan denouncing tariffs. The symbolism was obvious. Reagan, the conservative hero of free trade, seemingly calling out Trump's own protectionist crusade. The ad hit hard. Within days, it generated over 12 billion impressions worldwide, trended on U.S. cable talk shows, and was even quoted on the floor of the U.S. Senate. But at the same time, it infuriated President Trump, who viewed the campaign as a personal affront. In response, Trump, already fuming over Canada's resistance to his Liberation Day tariffs, suspended trade talks with Ottawa. Washington insiders called it one of the most severe diplomatic breakdowns of the Trump-Carney era. Back in Toronto, reporters pressed Ford for details. He confirmed that Trump himself had called repeatedly, demanding that the ad be pulled. Ford refused at first. He said, "We waited 3 days because it was working." Eventually, the ad was paused, but Ford emphasized that the campaign had already done its job, reminding Americans that tariffs on Canada were effectively taxes on American consumers. At the same time, Prime Minister Mark Carney, who had been traveling in Asia, quietly moved to calm the situation. According to Ottawa insiders, Carney's team offered an apology to Washington in hopes of restarting negotiations. Ford made clear that such diplomacy wasn't his style. He said bluntly, "I'll never apologize to President Trump. He's trying to destroy our province, our country, steal aluminum and auto jobs. You show weakness, he'll smell it like a pit bull."
Beneath the sound bites lies a complex political fault line, one that runs through the heart of Canada's trade strategy in the Trump era. Mark Carney's federal government is pursuing what officials call a strategic discipline approach. Rebuild trust with the U.S. administration, avoid public escalation, and prepare for the 2026 USMCA review that could reshape North American trade for a generation. The goal is long-term stability, not short-term confrontation. Doug Ford's approach could not be more different. He speaks the language of political populism, blunt, emotional, and rooted in the frustrations of working-class Ontarians who see factories closing and supply chains collapsing. For Ford, Trump's tariffs are not abstract policy. They are a direct attack on people who build cars, pour steel, and keep Ontario's industrial heart beating. Tariffs don't work anywhere in the world, Ford insisted. They especially don't work with your number one customer. His argument resonated with business leaders across southern Ontario who have watched billions in investment shift south since the White House began reshoring production. The Premier's hard-nosed stance also carries political calculation. By publicly defying Trump, Ford positions himself as a protector of Canadian sovereignty, a rare moment when a provincial leader steps into the national arena and wins applause. Polls taken after the controversy showed a surge of support for Ford among manufacturing belt voters who feel abandoned by Ottawa's measured tone. Yet Ford's defiance also risked fracturing Canada's trade front. Carney's team, wary of mixed signals, reminded premiers that international negotiations fall under federal jurisdiction. It is the responsibility of the Government of Canada to conduct these talks, the Prime Minister emphasized, subtly rebuking Ford's independent foray. Over the following days, Ford softened, slightly. "He's the Prime Minister, I'm the Premier," he said later. "When it comes to national issues like making a deal with the US, that falls on his lap. I'm there to support him." The pivot reflected both pragmatism and political pressure. With trade talks on ice and markets nervous, unity was the only viable message. Even so, Ontario hasn't fully retreated. Ford continues to enforce his province's ban on U.S. alcohol sales in government-run stores, the lone retaliatory policy still in effect. He said, "Anything could be an irritant, but we have to stand firm." The measure is mostly symbolic, but it captures a wider truth. Canada's patience with Washington's tariff games is wearing thin.
The Ford-Carney split is emblematic of a broader transformation inside Canada. For decades, the country prided itself on quiet diplomacy, a steady, understated counterpart to America's louder politics. But under Trump's second term, that balance has changed. The U.S. now treats trade as a weapon, not a partnership. Tariffs on steel, autos, and lumber are bargaining chips. Canadian leaders must decide whether to respond with calm negotiation or visible pushback. Ford's refusal to apologize and his description of Trump as a pit bull who smells weakness captures the mood of a country tired of being the polite neighbor. Across Canada, editorial pages called it the first honest answer to Trump's bullying. Meanwhile, Ottawa faces a tightrope. Every escalation risks jeopardizing billions in cross-border trade, yet every concession risks political backlash at home. The federal government is trying to avoid another collapse of talks before the 2026 USMCA review, where Washington is expected to demand stricter rules of origin and new auto content quotas.
Doug Ford's vow never to apologize may have begun as a fiery soundbite, but it has evolved into something far larger, a symbol of Canadian resistance in a new era of economic confrontation. For decades, Canada's political culture valued restraint, careful phrasing, polite negotiation, and compromise. Now, in the face of relentless tariffs and shifting alliances, that old playbook is being rewritten. Ford's defiance, Carney's diplomacy, together they illustrate a country testing the boundaries of its independence. As the countdown to the 2026 USMCA review begins, the question for Canadians is no longer whether to push back, but how. Will Canada continue playing the patient partner, or will it adopt Ford's bolder tone, one that meets Trump's aggression head-on? Because in the end, the stakes go far beyond one commercial or one apology. They go to the heart of Canada's economic sovereignty. And as Ford put it, with unmistakable conviction,
If anything, you roll over with President Trump. We've seen what President Trump does. He smells weakness, he'll latch on you like a pit bull. And we should never, ever show weakness with President Trump. And we'll never stop fighting for Ontario and Canadian jobs.
Leaders from every level of Canadian government are lashing out at Stellantis today. The automaker says it's reneging on plans to make Jeeps in Brampton, Ontario, and moving production to the U.S. instead.
The Prime Minister pushing back against Ontario's Premier, calling on him to get tougher on Donald Trump.
There's times to hit back and there's times to talk, and right now is the time to talk.
It began with one headline that shook both sides of the border. Stellantis, the parent company of Jeep, confirmed it would move production of its Compass model from Brampton, Ontario, to Illinois. The shift, worth roughly $13 billion in new U.S. investment, promised around 5,000 American jobs, but left 3,000 Canadian workers facing unemployment. For Washington, it looked like vindication. President Trump called it a win for American labor and proof that his aggressive tariff strategy was working. In the White House narrative, companies were finally coming home. But in Brampton, Ontario, the story felt very different. The mayor described the announcement as a punch to the gut for a city that had built cars for generations. Thousands of families now faced an uncertain future, while the local economy braced for the loss of wages, suppliers, and community support. Behind the emotion lay a deeper reality. Trump's tariffs, 25% on most Canadian goods and 10% on energy, had rewritten the economics of cross-border production. Stellantis was responding to pressure, not opportunity. The policy that aimed to protect U.S. manufacturing was forcing North America's most integrated industry to tear itself apart. And yet, amid the anger, Canada's national government stayed calm. Prime Minister Mark Carney did not call for revenge. Instead, he delivered one quiet message that defined the country's tone. Now is a time to talk.
Across Canada, frustration boiled over. In Brampton, local unions warned that the Stellantis move could trigger a domino effect, with other automakers reconsidering their Canadian operations. Auto parts suppliers feared they might follow the same path south, taking thousands of indirect jobs with them. Patrick Brown, the city's mayor, urged Ottawa to restore the retaliatory tariffs that had been lifted earlier in the year. He reminded reporters that both the federal and Ontario governments had invested heavily in retooling Stellantis' plants in 2022. Workers wondered whether that public money was now lost. Economically, the shock rippled outward. Data from Statistics Canada showed that automotive exports had already fallen by 9% between January and September 2025. The decline was steepest in Ontario, where steel and aluminum shipments had slowed after new U.S. duties took effect in February. Even industries outside autos, furniture, timber, and building materials were feeling the squeeze. Yet the impact in the United States was not as straightforward as the headline suggested. Higher tariffs had raised costs for American builders, and shipping data from the Port of Los Angeles in September showed a 12% slowdown in furniture and cabinet imports because of overlapping duties. In other words, the supposed victory for U.S. industry was also tightening pressure on its own consumers. In Canada, the anger was political but also strategic. Many provincial leaders wanted to fight back, to match tariffs with tariffs. But Ottawa hesitated. The Prime Minister's office believed that a loud response could escalate a trade war at the exact moment Canada needed stability. Instead of retaliating, Carney's government focused on what it called re-anchoring supply chains, supporting domestic sectors quietly while keeping diplomatic doors open.
So the strategy has to take all of that into account and deliver the results. We start from a position where we have a better deal than any other country in the world with the United States. 85% of our trade is free. The deals the Americans have signed with everyone else has tariffs on the core of the trade and then higher tariffs on the strategic sectors. So we're starting from this stronger position.
When Carney finally appeared before reporters, his tone was measured. He acknowledged the pain in Ontario, but insisted that restraint was not weakness. Canada, he said, was already engaged in intensive negotiations with Washington across several key industries: energy, aluminum, steel, forestry, and autos. He planned to brief Ontario Premier Doug Ford on progress in those talks. Carney's broader message was that trade policy could not be managed through emotion. The country, he argued, must prepare for the upcoming USMCA review in 2026, when every clause of the North American Trade Agreement would be reassessed. Acting rashly now could jeopardize that process. He reminded Canadians that their country still enjoyed the best access to the U.S. market of any nation on Earth. According to data from the Department of Global Affairs, roughly 85% of Canada's exports enter the United States duty-free. By contrast, America's recent deals with the European Union, Japan, and South Korea all included tariff floors on major goods. Canada's existing framework, though strained, remained uniquely favorable. Carney's approach contrasted sharply with the rhetoric from local leaders. Where they saw betrayal, he saw leverage. His goal was to keep negotiations alive until the United States itself faced pressure to compromise, from rising prices, disrupted parts supplies, and a restless manufacturing base that relied on Canadian inputs. There are times to hit back and times to talk, he said. Right now is the time to talk. For Carney, dialogue was not surrender, it was positioning, a way to ensure that when the next round of trade talks begins, Canada still has cards left to play. As the weeks passed, the meaning of that restraint became clearer. Canada began to redirect its focus inward and outward at the same time. Provinces like Nova Scotia accelerated resource projects, fast-tracking exploration for lithium and other critical minerals.
Federal agencies pushed investment toward domestic steel and battery component plants to keep the sector alive. Abroad, Ottawa intensified ties with partners outside Washington's orbit. Negotiations advanced with the European Union on expanding their clean energy framework, while trade missions to Japan and South Korea explored supply chain cooperation independent of U.S. oversight. Canada was no longer waiting for permission to act. Meanwhile, the United States faced growing logistical strain. Tariffs that once looked like a shield now acted like a tax on its own system. Auto analysts at S&P Global noted in an October 2025 report that vehicle assembly costs in the Midwest had risen nearly 14% year-over-year due to higher input prices and transport delays. The reshoring push was creating bottlenecks, not efficiency. Trump's claim of victory over Canada now looked less certain. The Stellantis move symbolized a political win, but economically, it revealed a fragile reality. Protectionism cannot isolate an integrated market without breaking its rhythm. Every action to weaken a partner risks weakening the network itself. For Canada, the road ahead remains difficult. Jobs have been lost, and communities like Brampton are still reeling. But Carney's decision to pause, to talk instead of retaliate, may define a new phase in the relationship. His message is pragmatic, that power in trade is not just about who strikes first, but who endures long enough to shape the outcome. The Stellantis episode was supposed to prove Trump's strength. Instead, it exposed how deeply connected North America's economies remain, and how a single tariff meant to punish can end up redrawing alliances, reshaping industries, and reminding the world that sometimes the quiet response is the most strategic one of all.